So it'll be specifically about Hurricane Maria impact and nothing more.
No, I want to talk about that other stuff. I'm charged up. I'm ready to go.
So be it. All right, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Workshop, that is. Impact fee study update, Superintendent.
Good afternoon, Chairman Soto and members of the board. I'm pleased to bring back today some additional information as you requested with community input on our impact fee study and where we are in that particular process. There are several documents that our folks from Tyndall Oliver will walk through with you, including a profile sheet that we asked her to create, as well as then some different ways to look at what we might do moving forward with impact fees. We also have some information that Frank will review with you in terms of proposed changes to the ordinance to try to get to some of those short-term rental questions that have been on the board's mind even going back to 2014. You do have space in the agenda, Chairman Soto, for public comment. And we've reserved a spot over here so that the public comment would still be able to be recorded with a place to sit and all those types of things when you decide that it's appropriate.
Very good.
Okay?
All right.
So you want to start with our district profile?
Yes. Good afternoon. That's that one-page summary. Basically, you asked us to summarize demographic economic variables that affect the impact fee level. So the first item is Osceola County is a fast-growing county. Ranks 19th out of the 67 Florida counties in terms of current population. And that ranking was 35th in 1976, so it's been growing at a faster rate and increasing its ranking. It ranks second in terms of population growth rate, which is projected.
Can we go back, because we're ranked 12th or 13th within the state on student population, aren't we?
This is just regular population.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we have.
Discrepancy hurt.
I know it does.
Yeah. Sorry.
And the second in population growth rate projected at 2.3% annually through 2045, and ranks 8th in terms of absolute growth. About 293,500 people are projected to be added through 2045. So when you have a fast-growing county, of course, the need for schools occur at a faster rate. You're also a young county with high generation rate.
Wait a minute, where do you get that 293,000 through 2045? Because I've got documentation that's 400,000 through 2040.
That is from the Beaver, University of Florida Beaver projections.
What's it from?
Yeah.
University of Florida.
The numbers that we have been given by the county for several years now has that number at 400 and 500 and 600,000.
Right, they may have done their own analysis.
No, I can find
Wait,
out
wait,
where it came from.
could it be, this is a net gain added to the current population?
Right, it is.
So are you looking at what the population is projected to be? This is just an addition to?
We have 365,000. We have 300.
I'm just asking.
Added.
Yeah, that's
I know that.
additional. Okay.
So
We have
basically.
300 population now is about 365,000. We're expected to grow by 120% through the year 2040.
Right.
That's 400.
So that's off from that number.
So that is off.
That's 425,000 as opposed to 300.
Correct.
Yeah, so there is a significant
So,
variance there.
you're right, but again, the point of this is you are a fast-growing county, so that supports it even further. But this, I mean, we can't provide it, but this is from the University of Florida Beaver's medium projections. Maybe they are using higher.
So what's important is just that the rate of growth is.
It's fast, yeah, exactly. And then also it's a young county with high generation rate. So age-wise, median age-wise, you rank 8th youngest among the 67 counties, and that was 45th in 1980. So again, you're getting younger and younger. Ranked 7th in student generation rate. And so these characteristics, of course, basically say as your population grows, you're also attracting younger population. So that also adds to the need of providing schools at a faster rate. In terms of economic conditions, tax revenues, the county ranks 34th out of 67 counties in terms of wage rates, and it used to be 45th. So then it looks like the wage levels are improving over time. In terms of income, it's the other way around. Currently you rank 45th and used to rank at 34th, so that's getting worse. So even though this ranking is sort of in the middle, it's still not at par with the population growth ranking. So when you have moderate wages and income, that tends to result in less spending, which in turn lower tax revenues. So in terms of ad valorem tax revenue per capita, you're ranked 23rd, and that used to be 9th in 1976. So that means like you're losing ground in terms of your funding availability. So 1 mil here is generating less than some of the other counties. And then you rank 17th in terms of sales tax per capita, which is tourism, and you used to rank 4th. So again, there's a losing ground here in terms of revenues. So when you have high generation rate, high growth, and then the revenues not necessarily keeping up with it, that tends to reflect in the spending for funding for school infrastructure, and then that kind of, you see it in the credit. You are not able to put too much other taxes into school infrastructure, and that results in a higher impact fee.
Nilden, does all of this data come back from the University of Florida's Beaver
Yes.
report? Okay.
For the most part, I think the wages and income may be Bureau of Labor Statistics. But
Okay.
yeah.
And I'm assuming when you do the complete and total report at the end of this, those sources are clearly
Yes.
identified? Yeah. Any other questions or comments about this part? Okay. So before we go over this last sheet, which is where we might be in terms of adopted rates, depending on the conversation of the board, I would recommend that we kind of go ahead and walk through some of the updates that Nilden's made in the data since we last met.
So, I'm kind of go through this way, right? Okay. Again, we have background findings, next steps, but primarily focusing on the changes.
Please.
So background, as you know, it's an update since 2014. Impact fee definition we went over before. This chart again was showing the revenues collected during the past 4 years and the units that came along.
That just reminded me to.
Yeah, term on.
And this is just the impact fee formula again that you've seen.
Walk through this.
Walk through that one, okay. So that's basically showing you the, we are taking school building costs divided by traditional students. We are taking transportation capital, that's the vehicles, and ancillary facility cost. That's divided by all students that are being transported or using that service, including charter students. Then from that, we are subtracting any future tax payments, and really the only thing that's going for infrastructure taxes relates to debt payments. In your case, there's no cash going toward future capacity. So that's divided by students.
And is that debt for capacity projects only?
Yes,
Right,
that's
so
only
for new
for
capacity, not for anything that we bonded, for example, for the new sales tax projects?
No, nothing for maintenance or renovation. And then that gives us the net cost, and that's multiplied by students per housing unit. And again, we are picking students with residential address, excluding anybody showing up in non-residential land uses, and dividing by all residential units. And again, that's only the traditional school students, excluding charter schools and homeschooling and so on.
And I asked Nilden to prepare this piece just because I know that there were some questions as we went through the study about different student numbers. It's because different elements of the student population go into these numbers. And so that just was helpful to me. I hope it's helpful to the board.
Right.
This is currently the revised schedule again, and I think you are familiar with that. So in terms of the findings, we showed this chart before, but basically the generation rate, this kind of walks through each component and how it's affecting for the single-family townhouse currently, the current category. So student generation rate decreases slightly, cost, which decreases the fee, cost increase, and that increases the fee, credit decrease, that also increases the fee, and overall effect is about 11% increase.
And my understanding is that the credit component went down because of the COPS that we were able to refinance.
Yes, and
pay
also you
off.
paid some
Right.
of it since the last study.
Right.
Yeah. So these are the elements that we went through before. So I'll start with the cost because there were some changes to the cost component. Again, the purpose of the cost estimate is to include all costs necessary to build the schools, construction, architectural, site preparation, land, et cetera. And the costs were based on several items, including the current ongoing projects, bids, insurance values, cost information from other jurisdictions. This was a summary of the data, this is slide 13, that we were looking at, and we made some changes. I'm going to go over it in more detail, but there was questions about the high school bid being higher than our estimates, so we looked at that. In the case of middle school bid, the square footage we were using was labeled net, but it was actually gross, so we adjusted for that. So that went up. And then insurance values are still the same, and the ranges from other jurisdictions is the same. So basically, what ended up happening is elementary school remained the same, middle schools went from 155 to 165, and high schools went from 180 to 185. Now, I want to kind of show you how we sort of came up with that high school cost, because there were a lot of questions there.
And one of the things that we had asked Nilden to do was to go ahead and highlight those things that have changed since our last study, so that's why you see that in red, in the red box.
And we'll also show you the full costs, like last study and this study, so you can see. So the new high school is a different configuration than the prototype high school that we are using in the study. So basically, we are not sure exactly what the configuration changes is, has more amenities of one type versus not. But overall, we looked at what the cost per station is about $24,500. When we applied that number to the prototype facility, which has $2,500, then and back solve for the cost per square foot, we are ending up at $185. When we make these two changes, I'm going to show you the next slide. It's really, you are coming at the DOE cost limit anyway. So if you go to the next slide, basically with those changes, your total cost per student station, so it's sort of the fourth line in the data, is ending up about 27 to 29, and the DOE cost, we use the DOE cost and do a weighted average, we are coming up with within 0.3% of it, 27,139. And then down below, at very last line, you see what the figures you were looking at during the last workshop. So there's about a 3% increase from that thing with those two adjustments.
Questions?
So then,
So are we really gonna be over the DOE per student on our middle school? By $2,000 a kid, or $2,000 a station?
that's what the current bid results in, yeah.
But they're still working to be that particular project, if you remember correctly.
But the bottom line is, I think you are, like with these estimates, and remember, these are estimates as best as we can based on available data. So you're up in some categories, you're down in high school still. So overall, like if we strictly plugged in all the DOE numbers, we'd be coming up with the same weighted average. So I think you will probably have to, throughout the construction, have to work. I mean, we have other school districts holding workshops trying to figure out how to lower their cost. Both in terms of maybe configuring the building, like make the square footage fewer, a little tighter, and as well as the cost per unit. So you probably, to some extent, but you are very close. I mean, some jurisdictions are much higher, and it's a lot tougher for them to get down to that cost level. So. Then the next slide shows all costs, including land. And again, the figures in the red box is the final figures, and the down below were the figures from last presentation, so that you can compare it. Again, and that's that 3% increase from 27,800 to 28,600. Then Next item is the transportation and ancillary facility costs per student. So there are a couple things changed throughout. One is that we switched from COFTA figures to enrollment. So that is about 1 or 2% higher, and we are also reflecting the latest count. So it's more recent data. So there's a change there. And then in terms of transportation, the backup we had was an older backup, and the transportation department provided a more updated figure. So really the cost per buses went down. So that's why that 1,200 to 800, 1,218 went down to 840 per student.
We
So
looked
the
at,
buses were not 180,000.
no, we looked at the escalation factor that they were using in that original information provided to Tyndall Oliver and didn't feel like that was a reasonable number. So we asked the transportation folks to relook at that, and we feel like this is a much more accurate number. And I did request that they use the actual enrollment as opposed to COFTE, based on the fact that we know that COFTE really under-projects where we are and where we're going to be.
And the actual enrollments are always the right number to use.
And then,
So that lower number reflected in the 40 in the, I mean, that's a pretty big drop in cost, current value of transportation in 3 weeks.
The escalation factor was high when we looked at it.
ancillary facility costs did not change, except that because we switched to enrollment, the cost per student went down a little bit, about 2% because of the enrollment factor. And next slide shows you a comparison of the transportation ancillary cost to other jurisdictions based on recent studies. So in terms of transportation costs, most jurisdictions range around between 2 and 3.5% of their total cost is transportation cost. And you are right at 2.6 now. And then ancillary cost, no, 2.7, I'm sorry. Ancillary cost is ranging a little higher, it's like 2.5 to 4%, 4.2%, and you're on the higher end of that, 4.2%. And one reason, of course, may be we are also showing how much you are varying in terms of total dollars per student at the very bottom. And your total cost per station is lower than the average of these jurisdictions, so that may also affect the ratio. So the next slide shows a comparison of total cost last.
Why is our ancillary cost so high compared to everybody that serves those?
So the ancillary
Is
ancillary
it just
cost.
the way we calculate it, what we call ancillary versus what other people call it?
I think part of it is the average of other jurisdictions is higher, their cost, total cost, and yours is lower, so that may be one factor. And then it's the type of buildings like the administrative building, maintenance buildings, facilities.
Maybe, since we're such a large county, landmass wise, we have the multiple barns. I'm just throwing this out there, I'm not saying it's true.
Doesn't the Ross Jeffries property also figure
Ross
into this?
Jeffries.
It does,
Which is a
yeah.
different and unique kind of a building
And your
that we
wellness
have on our
center
roll.
also.
Okay.
I could
Wellness
see that.
center.
Oh, the wellness center.
That also figures, so that's kind of unique
Okay.
too.
Yeah,
That
that's
answers
the
the
outliers.
I hadn't thought about the wellness center, but that's helpful.
Oops, I went too far. Okay, so the slide 19 shows the comparison of total cost between the last workshop and now. So you see the cost went from 30,347 to 30,744, an increase of about 1.3%.
And that's primarily due to the use of actual enrollment as opposed to COFTE, as well as the price of construction of the facilities. Is that correct?
Right, and then it's somewhat offset with the transportation cost
Right, that
going
went
down.
down.
Right. Okay. In terms of credit calculations, nothing really changed other than if you go to slide 21, because we are using again enrollment, the debt service per student got adjusted slightly, so it's kind of. So slide 22 summarizes between last study and.
Excuse me.
Oh, yes, of
Here's
course.
that's for Sarah. Sarah, the debt for Indian River and Collier County we use for Harmony, that's retired, correct?
Yep, that ended last year.
Okay, thank you. I thought so. I wanted to just make sure. Okay.
So this slide again showing how each variable change for single-family, so for the current category, single-family townhouse versus multifamily. And the cost increase about 6%, credit decrease, and the net cost is about 12 to 13% increase. So any other change is from the student generation side on the final fee. So student generation rates, we made the adjustment for enrollment and also removed the age-restricted homes. Then there was additional analysis to address the short-term rentals, both using a sample based on the permitting over the last 3 years, and then also trying to come up with the inventory using the business tax receipt information. So here I'll go through the changes. So this is the current structure, and really with the enrollment adjustment, the rates went up about 2% or so since the September 19 workshop. And then compared to last study again, single family is decreasing slightly, and then multifamily increasing, and mobile homes, that's a correction to the units from the property appraiser side. Really, it's not a true increase. And overall increase is about 2%. Countywide. We then looked at the 5 categories that I think that was the direction to go forward with, and those are the changes again, like a 2-3% changes based on the enrollment and adjustment for the age restricted. We then calculated a short-term rental generation rate based on developments that came online over the past 3.5 years, I think. So that sample has about 4,800 units and about 450 kids, so it's giving a generation rate of 0.09. Now, the thing to be careful with that, of course, if they are lower, the students we have are coming from elsewhere, and that needs to be quantified, and for that, we need to have the full inventory of short-term rentals. Because short-term rentals, when we look at the last 3 years, they are making up like 40% of your permitting. So it has a big impact. If this rate goes down this much, financially, it has a big impact on you without adjusting the other side.
So you didn't adjust the other numbers?
Okay, so that's my sub story now. I'm coming to that. We tried.
You're coming to that.
Yes, right. Next slide. All right, so your staffers try to get directly from the business tax receipts the units identified as short-term rental. Doesn't seem like anybody has it. So we got the file that has everybody who paid business taxes. We isolated through zip codes the Westside area, and then there's uses and so on, like drugstore, whatever. Took those out, and then start matching remaining units, geocoding them. What we are running into where we get blocked, there's about maybe 3,000-4,000 addresses that are attaching themselves to a common area. Doesn't have a unit number. So then when we go to that common area, it's sometimes one building, sometimes multiple buildings. And we have to make an assumption that either all those units are short-term rental, or maybe a few of them. We basically will not know. Right there, we got stuck. Up to that point, we could get around any kind of issues. But then we talked to your Rhonda's group as well, and found out that they did the same type of exercise in 2015. And they took about 6 months to look up in those individual units and so on. But then at the end of it, they still couldn't come up. When you get to the multifamily, they could not come up with a reliable inventory. So So we don't feel this data is strong enough to increase somebody's fee. You know, we are going to go ahead and make lots of assumptions. These are all short-term, none of them, only a few of them. So what we actually suggest, and this also came out during Dr. Pace's conversation with the growth management, they were asking for a weighted generation rate and Westside overlay. I know that you don't want us to have two different fee districts. I think that was the direction. But Westside area is where entire inventory is. So really, when we study the Westside inventory, that's kind of like, you can also look at it as a life of a short-term rental. It's like part of the time it's full, normal unit, part of the time used as a short-term rental. It gives a break to them, not as much as this sample does, but it does reduce the generation rate about 50%. And while in that way, we are able to quantify how much everybody else has to go up. So you can use that as an in-between proxy until a better data is collected over time. So that's one option. But as far as going down to the very low rate without adjusting the others, it's a policy decision. You can absolutely do it, but it will have financial consequences on you.
If I understood you a minute ago, did you say in the west side, or in the county, about 40% of our new homes are short-term rental?
Yeah, last 3 years.
Okay, no, I get that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
How did
But
you
no,
determine that?
Well, we have 4,800 units, and then your very first chart
Sorry.
Can you
shows
not hear?
I
about.
can't hear, I haven't heard a whole lot what she
You
said.
Come sit up here with
She's
me.
talking to y'all.
I know, it's terrible to come to
Right here, right
workshops
here.
because you can't hear.
Just,
I'm so sorry.
Come sit up here
I'll
with
pull
me.
this away from the table so I don't.
It's intentional, Larry.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm just trying to make sure.
So what we did is in the very earlier slide when we were showing you the revenues.
Now, can I finish my question?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We talked about this at the last meeting, when going back further term. My hunch is if you went back at the year 2000, 40% of the homes we were building were not short-term rentals. So this is clearly a change in what's going on in this county. How do we account for that? Because we're generating, the same number of students were generated last year. I don't care if they all lived in one apartment or if they lived in, we just said basically that 40% or 100% of them are living in 60% of our home starts. So are our numbers of 0.45 or whatever the number is really reflecting reality of the 60% of homes that have students in them? Or is the 40% that have no students really impacting those numbers? You understand my question?
Are you referring to split in the slide 28?
I'm referring to an overall statement. Tim, you following where I'm coming from? I'm wondering if our model that goes back, I mean, that's a huge change in, I think, in a demographic. If 40% of our home starts are indeed short-term family. So our students that we're generating are coming from 60% of the home starts.
And then
So
those
are we
numbers
grossly
be
understating
adjusted
those
accordingly.
I mean, if it's 5%, I'm not sure it's a needle mover. 40%'s got to be a big, huge needle mover. And it goes back to looking at our demographic. How far back do you go to where we really have a reflection of what's happening today? Because a reflection in 1995 would not be the same reflection that we have today of the number of short-term. We talked about this last time, how far back we go and the change in what's really going on, size of what's going on, the number of families and students living in places. And is this what is making this look funny?
I agree with your question. I mean, it's a simple part, and I understand it, and it's been what our concern has been.
Right,
Is when we factor in the West, what happens to the rest, right?
right.
May I just
Yeah.
ask for that clarifying detail? So how did we know that 40% of the home starts were short-term rental?
Right.
Because if we can determine that.
Right, the number of units we use in calculating that .093, that's the permitted 4837 from slide 26 is permitted over the last 3 years of short-term rentals. They were identified around the working with, I think, the building community. And then your total permits during that time period was 14,000, but we adjusted to make it equal, so it's about 12,000 for the same period. So, 4,800 over 12,000 is.
And this 4837 is a number that we staff were able to identify by our review of the development submittal plans? Or
Yes,
was that something else? Yes?
Yeah, Rhonda can answer this.
I need to clarify. Are you talking about the 16,000 number, and then 4,800 have been built to date, and that leaves 12,000 left?
Yeah, 4,800.
So that's only units in the short-term overlay, that's not all of Osceola County. So in the short-term overlay, 16,000 units are available to be built that have been identified as short-term rentals based on the developer applications when we reviewed them. To date, 4,800 of them have been built, which means 12,000 can be built. So that's not all of Osceola County,
Right.
that's just in the overlay.
Yeah, 12,000 is countywide permitting all homes during the last 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, or last 3 and a 4 years, yeah.
So, Sarah, I think I've seen it here. We know on impact fees on collections how many homes started, how many homes are online last year, right?
Yes, we have the units.
And you know roughly what that number is?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
3,000 a year, of 3,500.
3,000.
3,500 a year, sorry.
So 3,500 a year, 1,500 of those, or
4,300 last year.
40%, whatever that number, 40% of 3,500,
Yeah.
were short-term rentals.
4,300.
We're-
Oh, last year was.
Oh, I see it.
4,300.
So 4,300 and 40% of that is 1,700.
1720.
But I think
So that
what Rhonda's
means-
saying is not 40% of that.
No,
Correct.
around the 40, no, it is 40% of
Okay.
that. I think.
So
it happens to
17
be
of the
same
4,300 were
amount.
short-term rentals, which conversely, what's that, 2,600 were homes that generated, or living quarters that generated a student. So are we grossly understating the number of students per single-family home, apartment, and whatever the other thing is, mobile home,
Yep.
of the ones that are occupying students?
Well, if you're spreading out that generation rate over 40% of your homes, I think that's, my argument has been, why is an actual generation rate 1, and we're sitting here talking about a 0.35? There's no way we get to that. Now I know how we get to that. 40% of the new builds are not generating any kids, or a very small number of kids, and we're allowing them to absorb
But-
that other
Right.
number.
But we are including all units in the county. We are not using, when we do our generation rate, all units, not just permitted units last 4 or 5 years. So in terms of percentage of all units, short-term rentals are likely to be less than 40%. It has you see what I mean? Like,
No,
we
I
are
don't, because I thought you
including
just told me they were 40%.
40% of permitted units, which has an implication on the revenue, absolutely, going forward.
Of new units, not total
These
inventory.
are permitted units they might build in 5 years that are in a DRI or something, or these are, what is,
The-
Because if you pulled a permit, they're getting ready to bring them out of the ground.
right, which
Right.
means we're gonna collect an impact fee on them probably within the next 12, 18 months or something.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though, what I think I heard you say is that the student generation rate is based on the total number of residential
Right.
units
There are
in the
104
county.
144,000 units in the county.
Right?
That's what it's based on, not, so.
What
especially-
percentage of those are short-term rentals?
That's what,
You
that's
can't, well,
what.
that's the answer we can't get.
Right.
No,
Ex-
but it's not 60,000. That's the answer you do know.
Yeah.
No, no,
Yeah,
I
no,
get
no,
that
we
the
know it's
existing,
not.
it's not 60, but if the, what's
Impact
coming,
fees for new.
but it goes back to using historical data to compute what our future impact is.
Correct.
And if our historical data and historical trends and historical modeling, or whatever you want to call it, is grossly changed, how far back do you go to use your average for modeling? Because we're clearly not,
So,
40% of permitting today does not look like any year in the past, other than maybe last year, the year before, maybe.
Yeah.
Does-
And
So
that's how
any
we-
year that we go back past that, to me, is distorting where we are in actuality
We're
today.
looking for, at historical data.
that's
tell
not-
us a
that's-
picture of today.
That's
that
not
has
indicative
nothing
of
to
what
do
we're
with
doing today, right. We've got a major demographic change going on here.
That's how you come up with a .22 generation rate for multifamily in 2014. And then still only bump that over to not even a .4, when we know it's actually probably about a .7 or a .8, maybe .6.
So impact fees are for the life of the house, and, you're gonna have different occupants in a house. Some will have more generation rates, some will have lower.
I get it.
So,
I
If you had
understand
a
that.
very stable county or community, trying to think of something, if you went to Tampa probably looks similar to what it did. I don't know how fast Tampa demographic type stuff.
I thought you were gonna pull out like Wakulla County or something.
I would do it.
Yeah.
Hardy County.
You think your history is indicative of what's happening today. Our history is not indicative of what's happening today. I don't think, based on the fact that we've got 40% of our coming
Yes.
permits are short-term rentals, where we've never had that percentage. I don't think.
And what is it?
I mean, that's
Is that
intuitive on
gonna
my
be
part. I don't-
sustained? Like, is that 40% a sustainable number, or is that gonna really slow? Is it gonna go to 50%?
I don't know.
In 2 years, is it gonna be 20%, or is it do
Say again,
this, or?
say again, Ms. Blake, what was?
Market-based, the developers even do that when they're bringing their traditional developments through. We want to build townhomes and we want to build a single-family residence. We're just going to keep pulling townhomes while the market is good. As soon as the market swings, we're going to quit building those and we're going to build out the rest of our development. And they're making that decision almost when they're pulling the permit. So vacation rentals are good right now. They're just going to keep slamming them.
I understand that, and that's
I
why.
know why they're building them.
Yeah,
I'm not questioning why they're
that's why
building
historical trends are good, because so 2008 doesn't show up and blow everything up. I get that. But the problem is we're talking about generation rates that should be much higher, I think, on the other end, but we're spreading them out on the 40% that are extremely low and not accounting for those. Because the historical data doesn't allow you, or you?
well, for one, we don't have a good inventory of short-term rentals. If we did, you could see that, just like we did. What we have closest is the generation rate of the west side versus the rest of the county. And how you might want to use it, not so much as a fee district, but one way to look at it, all the inventory is right now in west side. That's where they are allowed to build, right? So the generation rate there may not be as low as a pure short-term rental, but it's 50% lower than rest of them. It's a sort of an in-between transitional generation rate. It reflects the fact that some of these homes become normal, regular homes as they get older. So, there are some switches. So that can be used as a short-term rental, and then the rest of the county goes up some, but it doesn't necessarily goes up as much as it would have been if you were using .09 and you were able to quantify it. So that could be an in-between transitional generation rates, and then we can try to keep track of everything going forward and observe it, see if it's continuing that way or moderating and sort of dying away, going back to normal.
But, I toured one of these facilities this morning. I mean, I guess I get how we don't get the number, but, I mean, they're renting them the rooms, right? They have hotel service, they don't have, or they have, maid service. They don't have mailboxes. I just can't figure out how we can't get a real number on that.
Yeah, well, despite that, there's still kids I've dropped off at those places.
No, I understand on some of the situations, I get it. But I don't, nobody can figure out how many of these things there are, surely.
Because they're permitting a type of unit, not a use of
Mhm.
unit. So a house is a single-family, townhome, family condo, or apartment. The counties in the city don't care what they do with them, so they sign off on them, so they're not permitting a use. So until you get them to agree to track and monitor by the use and not just the type, we won't have accurate data.
You know, what-
Even the business tax receipt file changes every
Yeah.
year.
So the-
In case the tax on the house or the thing you do
So there aren't some kind of receipts, like
That's-
bed tax receipts or anything like that?
And it's only as honest as the people paying it. That's what the county said.
And what I don't understand about this whole thing is this comes around every few years, and the 55, the age-restricted communities went and got themselves a statutory deed restriction that they can apply, like Good Sam, et cetera. This is an industry that's doing very well. God bless them, and we need them in this county. But at the same time, you would think that they would go and do the same thing the age-restricted communities have done, which is create some sort of a deed restriction that says how they get their mail delivered, how they get their trash picked up, that they pay taxes, etc. And we wouldn't even be having this conversation because they'd be taken out of the equation. And, it's an industry that is no longer in an infancy
The problem
stage.
is, Jay, the way we use our historical data, they don't get taken out of the equation for 10 or 20 years.
Correct. Yep.
Well, no, to your point though, Clarence, but going forward, there is a fix that can be put in. And these impact fees that we're talking about now is predicated upon new construction. So with new construction, to your point, you're right, but relative to the conversation today, if that deed restriction existed from a statutory perspective, and Tallahassee loves this kind of stuff because it doesn't cost them any money. No one's asking for money, they're just asking for a deed restriction based on a specific type of unit that checks off these boxes that's in perpetuity, and this conversation never happens.
That is the most concrete way.
I understand that.
I'm surprised that hasn't been thought of. It seems like quite elementary, Mr. Wheeler. Has anything like that ever been attempted? I mean, if anybody could comment
Mr.
on that.
It's
Krappenbacher
not a
will go.
statewide problem.
Let-
It's an Osceola County problem.
Well,
You
sure
do have
got
more
enough horsepower
You
here in
want to
Osceola
let
County
Hector
to
come up and
make
talk?
Yeah,
Public-
sure.
public
Heck,
comment?
Larry wants to put a
it.
piece.
Hector's got something too.
Well,
Well,
we have a time for
Oh,
public
okay, we got
comment.
time for that, gotcha.
I don't know if Mr. Krippenbacher has any.
Or if we should go through
I'd-
some of the rest of this and lay out some of the options.
You want to go to this now?
I didn't know if you wanted us.
Oh, no, there's still more?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
No,
There's
let's continue. Yep,
associated
I'm
fee
following.
calculations. with
Hold on to
those
that thought,
generation
Mr.
rates. That's all right. All
But I
right.
really do believe that's the good question.
And slide 26 shows the staff's and Tyndall Oliver's best effort to try to get to a sample size that would make sense of properties that had been clearly identified as short-term rentals, and looking at how many students were being generated at that. That's where you get the .093.
Got
But
it.
you did not.
You
provi-
cannot do that.
But you did not provide us within the
Right.
5-category breakdown with that .093
Right.
as a category.
Yeah, and
I would have liked to
Remember,
see.
it's
I know.
This data-
And that's
Either they
what we
couldn't.
cannot
They
get.
just
Like
couldn't
we,
do it, right.
we tried, we looked at all the data. Your staff tried apparently same process 2 years ago. And it's the same conclusion that when you get to multifamily, we don't know which ones are short-term, which ones are not. It's just the whole building shows up. So if we are going to use that data to increase somebody's fee, we want it to be more reliable. If it was decreasing.
I mean, from a practical standpoint, we can't just give it up.
Was that the fee?
Right.
Correct.
The net.
Correct. It has to be, it has to be.
Because those are the numbers, it's a semantic of where they're coming from, but if 40% if 60% or 100% are coming from 60% of the structures, those are the structures.
But that's today. I mean, what happens is then you get neighbors like Windward K is a perfect example. That was built as short-term vacation rentals, and now, I mean, that inventory is 20, 25 years old. It's over half owner-occupied.
But I'll take any home they build in a short-term rental right now, they're building for $800,000. I'll collect the ad valorem for 10 years and call it a day when the first student moves in. When they have them.
That we've got so few sources of revenue. I appreciate what you're saying. We have so few sources of revenue. If, to your point, if you're doing that, then you're putting that same dollar burden on the single-family homes. I mean, you got to collect it somewhere.
That's
You're right. In
my
that
point.
case,
I don't think Clarence
yes.
is saying don't collect it.
No. In that environment,
Get the number right.
okay, I'm willing to do that. But then, as long as
I'm just thinking that this, when I heard the 40%, it really kind of hit me between the eyes on what.
Well, one of the things that, Frank will kind of go over with you when we start to look at the ordinance language that's been proposed in terms of changing and providing some options for us to consider for short-term rental. You've heard our experts say that to try to get to a valid and reliable number that would be reasonable and defensible to raise other fees, that are not short-term rental is really challenging with the data set that we have. And they've worked on it. We've worked on it. They've worked on it. We've tried to provide them as much information as we can. So the best guess that we have right now is that short-term rental property student generation would be about 0.093. But what we're saying is we don't feel like we have reasonable and reliable data that would allow us then to carry over what the real need is to other units with the data that we have now. But there are other options that we can consider. And one of those may be that we do something like this for now and then annually revisit it and have our staff and Tyndall Oliver track the data more consistently and continue to monitor and adjust the student generation rate as things change or don't change as more of these properties come online. That's just one option. But I think it would be wise for us to kind of look at what they've come up with the impact of the numbers based on the data that we have. And then if, with your permission, Chairman, we'd have Frank walk through the ordinance proposes. You could open up for public comment and questions from the board, and then we'll get our direction from there.
Proceed.
Okay, so this is slide 30, just showing the change since the last board workshop. Again, that's just a 3-4% change between all the components. This is the same type of information with the 5 categories. And
Slow down now.
okay, sorry.
Let's give you guys a chance to kind of absorb
Yeah.
this. So
So
this is if
at
we
those
stayed with
numbers-
one countywide fee with the student generations rates over based on the whole average of inventory that we have. This is what we would have. And those changes, remember, are based on the fact that we're going with student
Yeah.
enrollment instead of COFTE, the adjustment down on the transportation fee.
Right, all of those.
Yeah.
But if we do
exactly.
that, if we do this, and 40% are short-term rentals,
Right.
then we're not going to be collecting
Yes.
the
Right.
the need of the county.
We're gonna lose 40% of our
We're gonna
revenue.
lose
Right.
40% of the revenue,
Right.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
the way that that's.
Depending on what type of units there are.
Mhm.
And
No.
the next 2 slides is during
Explain
the,
it to us in a minute.
so the next slide is just September 19 figures by geographic area, and then the one after is the updated. And again, so you can see in the updated one, slide 33, countywide figures are shown, and then Westside and the rest of the county, and you can see that for the most part, Westside gets about, 50% break or so. And then the rest of the county increases. Again, this may be, you may want to use these rates for any short-term rental, and then the rest of the county as a starting point, sort of in between. They are not all the way as low as what the sample said, but at least it's moderated. Unless we can do deed restriction. That's probably the cleanest way. But at least this
If we do
would be-
deed restrictions then, since we got 40% of this stuff that could be deed restricted, we've got to look at our calculation for what it does
Correct.
for the remaining part.
Correct.
So-
It can't be based on 1999.
But as they are deed restricting, you are collecting that data, you know exactly who's deed restricting.
We
And that-
can't sit here, we'll be dead in 10 years while we're collecting data.
But up to that point, everybody paid their fees. So those who are starting to, willing to be deed restricted and not pay, you'll have an inventory. And you can do just a student generation update if you want every year.
Well, what happens in 2018? We do this and we lose 40% of our revenue
Here's the other
as a
question.
district for those students that are generated.
Are those deed restrictions in perpetuity?
Yeah. I'll go
That's
go
legal,
through
yeah.
that, but I can tell you just very quickly, one of the things that Dr. Pace and I talked about earlier is this particular area is moving in an unknown direction, and we're thinking we're going to actually have to monitor it on an annual basis initially.
The
to
West
be
Side
able
overlay.
to give you reports, that there's no other way to do it, because you could just get that far behind. And I think, I'll add this just based upon what I've seen at the airport. If you add the overriding impact of the relocation from Puerto Rico, all of these numbers may be moving all over And that's why, another reason why we think we really need to annually take a close look at it and report back to the board. Here's what we're seeing.
Say take a close look, does that mean that we put Tyndall Oliver or some firm just on a retainer on a regular basis, or we do it internally? What do you, and that's when you talk about it, because right now we do it every 3 years.
I can only, all we talked about was saying that annually we wanted to look at it, how we do that. We did not get into it this point.
Devil's in the details.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And
I appreciate
what I'll
the
talk to you
sentiment.
about later is arguably the beginning of the best start to try and track this prospectively.
I'm all for looking at it annually, but I don't want to spend $50,000 to $100,000 on a study every year.
I mean, we have clients who do partial limited updates, which are any given factor that's moving too much.
Included in the fee we've already paid, correct?
So as far as options, some of the options, I think we talked about all of them. Is deed restriction is one separate fee, but again, because of the revenue implications, that's not a very positive thing. And then differential fee in West Side overlay versus rest of the county, or using that sample of West Side overlay to apply it for short-term rentals, saying this is, they're at least that much lower, and everybody else is at least that much higher, but it's an in-between, maybe transitionary period. And then, of course, there's always the maintain the current structure.
So basically, the overlay,
I don't like any of them.
the overlay is kind of like a middle ground between the
Right,
two.
we know, because we know that, I mean, a pure short-term rental shouldn't have any students, really. So those rates are probably still on the higher end, but it's not as high as putting them together with the all units. So it sort of gives them a break, and it raises everybody else in a way that it balances. And then as through the monitoring, as you pinpoint to a better inventory and better data, then it can be refined.
You know, I can't help but, excuse me, guys, there's a little bit of more to come. I can't help but think there was a comment made about this being in Osceola County. I guess what I derived from that is basically that these short-term rentals happen in this geographical area specifically for, you know, the tourism industry and for
30 years.
For those. Okay.
it's not new.
How is Orange County dealing with these short-term
They've called-
rentals? I mean,
They've
how-
called us,
Wait.
ask us what we're doing.
They just called me too.
I've had 2 board members call me already from Orange County, say, what are we doing?
But it's newer thing, because in the past, they didn't feel it. So they just said suddenly they are seeing a higher
Right.
concentration,
Right.
and, yeah. And also they are checking as there are students, so they are joining you now.
For clarity, slide 33 represents any type of category in the overlay.
Wait.
That's what
Right,
you're
it's a
presenting,
combined,
regardless of whether
right.
it's deed restricted or not, whether it's going to produce students or not. We're saying,
Right.
if they construct a unit in the West Side overlay, this is the fee.
Right.
And we don't know whether or not it will or won't generate a student. That's what this represents.
Yes, this is just that area as though it's a different jurisdiction.
Not
That's
to-
their generation.
Not to muddy the waters, but because we're talking about the west side, and I happen to know that area pretty well, have we heard any movement at all, Dr. Pace, or anybody, have we heard any movement at all relative to Celebration of building out their new development? I mean, because that's gonna, because we know what that will do with us when we're supposed to get land. Any news on that, one way or the other?
Other than it's Mattamy Homes as the developer?
Well-
I don't know timeline. Rhonda, have you had an update on the timeline for Celebration Isle?
Did Mattamy actually buy the deal?
They closed on the first phase.
Okay, good.
We know everything's moved down one year.
Tim, what do you think this does to behavior of pushing development into that west side area that we may otherwise hope that it's going in other parts of the county? Is this a big enough difference to drive behavior for, I'm talking about traditional homes, not really not the short term.
Should go back to 33 for
I think
everybody.
it creates opportunity, which will enhance behavior. I don't know that it will shift it, because there's still a market demand in other parts of the county.
This is not a big enough differentiator to override the market. to drive the market?
I don't know, ask a guy. I don't,
You understand my question?
I do understand it. I don't, there's still a demand, in my opinion, there's still a demand in the rest of the county for residential units, which will continue to fill that existing gap of inventory that's needed countywide. Do I think that developers will start looking at the additional opportunity for the higher values on the west side, the lower cost for development, and say, well, maybe we diversify how much we're building east and west slightly to recapture some additional opportunity over here? Yeah, they should. Do I think it's going to all of a sudden swing the pendulum completely over to the west side? I don't. I don't think it would. There's still a shortage of inventory that we have to deal with growth and opportunity in the marketplace, and even what's represented in the resale market.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask somebody in the audience?
Sure.
Brock, did you hear my question, or did you understand my question?
The reality is on the average price in that part of town, it's about 200 basis points on the retail revenue. So, you know, if a deal's tight, it may swing the vote. But I don't know that it's going to drive big picture strategy and decision making.
Thank you.
How can we get I need to look at this overlay map again. This is too small.
You want to borrow my glasses? It'll look a lot bigger.
I think they emailed us.
That might be true.
Did you email us a high-resolution PDF of that map?
Frank?
All right, I thought I saw it.
We had it somewhere.
They
put
gave
it
us
up.
McDial will go get us some.
Yeah, they gave us a PDF that you could zoom in and see it with pictures.
I'll just revisit a comment that I've made before. Is the overlay? I don't like it. I don't like anything about it. And what I'm trying to look at is exactly, I know where it ends, but there's some detail in here that I'm trying to pinpoint. And I know it's a cleaner approach, but I'm really concerned that it's a really flawed approach with how broad that is and what's going to happen, because what we're talking about a product type on the far west side where we all just came from our meeting is very different than what's going to happen in that in-between place between Dyer Boulevard, Hoagland, the Tapestry area, and swinging west, including North Poinciana Boulevard, Celebration, and that whole swath right in between. And I want to figure out, I'll look at the map when it comes in, what that southern boundary is, because I really can't tell with just glancing at this. I've always had a problem with this overlay. I don't like it. It's the simple truth. So.
Tim, are you looking at the south boundary?
Yeah.
It's just north of Intersection City. So it follows Shingle Creek and it cuts across just north of Intersection City and moves back down.
Is the BK Ranch in there and all that?
It's large enough that it could cross over into it. I'm kind of waiting to see how they buy their parcels out, but it does have the potential to flip towards the rest of the ranch.
Right. Which is not going to be the product type that we're talking about.
Right, and I think about Celebration Island Village would
Yep.
also be kind of inside of there as well.
Yep.
So there are some large communities coming in.
Again, using this is sort of a in-between. It's
I
not
know.
exact, it's
Mhm.
just moderation.
Yep.
You want me to go? Mr. Chairman, should I proceed with the ordinance?
Chairman Soto, if we could just ask our folks in the audience if they want to make public comment to come to the mic so that we can make sure that that's recorded, that would be great.
Have we got any yet?
Well,
all-
and we've all
we
asked
haven't offered
questions,
that.
which is great. It's been our fault. I mean,
Do you
it's
wanna
not
do the-
anybody's degree.
Do you want to do the
But
public comment now, or do we move forward?
I wondered if
with-
maybe Frank should review this with the board and talk about what this would add to our discussion, and then,
Which one of these is this ordinance supporting, or is it?
This ordinance identifies the categories of vacation billers and short-term rental. And what it effectively does,
Is it,
it's new categories.
but is it, are we looking at page
Which
33,
slide are we
32, or
looking at?
31?
What's the net result?
31 probably, right?
30 is the sample, right? Yeah.
So this does not have the west side overlay feature in this ordinance. That's what I'm just trying to figure out
But
what.
it
Yes, it
does.
does address the overlay district as it relates to, let me see, go back to it.
Yes, that's what I've been trying to
Okay.
say, yeah.
So it's slide 33 then.
This could be 31 or 33, depending on what the board wanted to
Okay,
do,
okay.
okay?
The short-term
If-
rental.
If I'm mistaken.
I can look at this as
Either
you're
way-
talking, I'll
Right.
get it.
Either way, if you look at both of these, this provides, first of all, an option for the exemption for a deed-restricted property that Frank can explain to you with a notice to cure, 60 days, all of those things built in. And then it describes a separate definition, which could be for a lower fee. The question is, would the board want to adopt, I mean, we just need your feedback, the lower fee based only on the sample size?
So your page, what number?
I'm going to tell you, board,
Slide
without
31.
collecting that from someone else,
Right.
I would not be, especially if it's 40% of the new home builds. I'm for finding out a way
That,
to identify the short-term rental, but I'm not for finding that and not recapturing it from the other bills.
What are impact fee collections going to be this year? And what were they?
Over 40 million.
40 million.
So I'm not for giving up $16 million because we're generating the students.
Or according to Nilgen, if the board wanted to go with this ordinance, the board could vote to adopt the Westside overlay fee only for defined short-term rental properties as declared in this ordinance, or language that you might direct Frank to revise or adopt. This is our first blush at this. So in other words, in the past, it's been all or nothing in the Westside overlay. They either pay the full fee structure, or everybody in the Westside overlay pays this reduced fee structure based on what we know is the student generation rate in that area. It's very similar to what I understand the Growth Management Task Force suggested last time, in that we look at a percentage. But again, trying to nail down what is the percentage of short-term rental property in that's being permitted today is our challenge.
I got a question.
But you could say residential family developments would pay the full fee structure, but if you are doing the things that are defined in this ordinance or another one that say you're going to be a short-term rental property, you would pay this reduced fee structure. You would have lesser loss or impact on the district's collection of impact fees. And then, as Frank suggested earlier, we could come back and revisit that, just that piece of the impact fee study for 3 years in a row or something to that degree, and make adjustments as needed. That's just a possibility. And
One
please
thing,
speak
let
up,
me just
Chris.
clarify. The rates shown on the west side can be for short-term rental, and then rates shown on the rest of the county would be used for other units. So they would go up some, but they wouldn't go up all the way to make up for that .09.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question. Clarence, you made a good point earlier. You take the ad valorem taxes at $600,000 or $700,000, value per year. So the question I've got is, for those units that would want the exemption based on deed restriction, et cetera, is there language in there that says that they can never apply for homestead and be homestead properties?
I should ask, but the ones
It's not in this ordinance right now.
If that was in there, I might be able to support it, because then, to your point, Clarence, as it goes up in value, we're getting those taxes. I mean, then that makes perfect sense, but if they can apply for homestead, it's off the table for me.
So,
But if they change.
I need to clarify something.
No, if it's a deed restriction,
Right, I know,
part of the
but
deed restriction, they can never apply for homestead.
And if they did away with the deed restriction, then at that point, they pay their
We got no
fee.
enforcement mechanism.
But Jay, if I sell my house tomorrow, somebody buys it, they don't pay an impact fee. Part of the theory of that is, they don't pay an impact fee
Because you
because
did.
that house has been paying.
Right, I understand
ad
that.
valorem taxes forever. It's paid its way in.
No, you don't pay the impact fees because you paid the impact fee up front. Somebody paid the impact fee.
Not in my case.
Depends on the age of
The age, I'm
Okay,
using
okay.
my.
But it also
because it's
reflects the
pre-impact.
value, the
Okay,
current value as
pre-impact.
well,
Right.
because you have a $11,000,
Okay, I understand, but we are where we are today.
That does
Clarence.
reflect the value.
We are,
Yes, it does.
but to your point, we are where we are today. Okay, I understand your model, but
Yeah.
that's not entirely relevant regarding what we're talking about right now. Going where we are today, okay? We're talking about people who have got an industry and they've got a model where they're building units specifically for people to come and go to the parks and do whatever, then turn it over and someone else is going to take, and that's great. I got no problem with that. If in the deed restriction, it can never be homestead, so that we never have to be locked into that ad valorem, Hey, man.
Let me ask,
All right, Jay, let-
let me ask a question, because I don't want to derail a little bit here. You know, this workshop, you know, began with this sheet that we just started. Are we doing this analysis with this in mind? Is this what the district wants us to do, Superintendent? These considerations here?
Yes.
Because I hear a lot of back and forth about historical data, the here and now, and all kinds of examples. Is this what I'm supposed to be thinking about when I analyze this?
Yes. That is the description of our district and what makes our district unique and more challenging in terms of meeting our capital needs.
Has the district had any opportunity to think about these options? Do they want to share with us where they are? Do they need more time?
I need more time.
That's a fair.
I wanted to hear
that's a fair-
more from the board,
That's a
more
fair.
from our
That's a fair
stakeholders.
response, because I still think that there's just a lot of unknown variables that are still coming around, and I sense from at least some of the board members some confusion as to. And here's the biggest one: is how does the future looks like once we do something, and that's the one that should matter. And
I do want to clear up one thing, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go
I'm
on.
sorry. Let me get this correct, if I heard you correctly. So what you're saying is if we divide this from countywide to Westside, you only qualify for the special Westside reduced fee if you are following these rules, or all homes in Westside.
No.
You can't do all homes. Can't do all homes.
This is only for the defined category of short-term.
So we can have a
rental.
reduced rate in a specific overlay. So if I build a single-family home in West Side, I'm still going to pay the 11.8,
You are going to.
even though it's in West Side.
12,
It's your celebration, maybe, right.
But 12.8.
rest of the county column. What we.
Well, I didn't understand that.
Yeah,
This is-
what
this
is
is-
countywide versus rest of county?
Rest of the county, when we take out the kids and the homes in the west side, the
Yeah.
remaining
33.
kids and the homes, rest of the county
So the
are
fee
those
structure we should be looking at on this is the two on
White,
the right.
yeah, west side and rest of the county.
Yeah.
That's what we were trying to do, if we had the supply, the whole
That's the
inventory.
fee, not the countywide.
Right,
It's the what?
right.
So I want to get this straight for going forward, because I'm maybe getting to something that I don't 100% like, but I might could support. Only if you qualify for a short-term rental, you get the reduced rate only in the West Side District.
It-
Otherwise, you're paying, even in the West Side
Right.
District, the normal rest of the county
Yes,
rate.
yes.
So we're looking at, if we're looking at chart 33,
Yes,
all right? We have the status quo, what we have on there, the highlighted.
right.
Instead, the proposal of this slide is, we have two schedules now, okay? On the West Side schedule, there's something missing then, the reduced fee
No.
for,
Sorry.
am I correct?
It's not missing, it's replacing that reduced fee. So we are saying, almost like if I change that west side title to short-term rental, it will probably be clearer. So we are saying west side gives us a sample of
Yep.
activity where
You're
all
not
the
going to
inventory
short-term a
is.
mobile home.
But-
No, I
but
would
that's-
not.
Well,
If you
mobile
do,
home-
we're going to charge you
But it looks- but it
$12,000.
looks-
Mobile home
but it
is
looks-
like too little of a sample. I
but
think
it
we would
looks-
just keep that even across the board.
But where does the ordinance fit into table 33?
I think there is a schedule, reference to a schedule for short-term rental.
I know, I'm trying to put it,
That's where it's
let
right.
everybody know.
Oh.
That's-
I think
You'd apply
everybody's got
the-
it. I just was
without
clarifying
this,
to make
you'd
sure I was
then
on the same page.
Well, I didn't understand that. I thought it was,
Right.
the next home in celebration would pay that $6,000. Well,
No, no.
I did too, but I
There's a
thought I heard her
reference-
say something different.
No,
And I thought I said
Just
Frank,
discuss
Frank.
last.
Okay, so this is a change from that.
Yeah.
Because we have some language now. In our last board workshop, when we talked about the West Side overlay, we were looking at more an all or none. So all units in the West Side overlay would pay a reduced fee. All units outside the West Side overlay would pay the increased fee.
That's like
to absorb
30
the full impact.
That's what slide 33
Right.
reflects.
If you remember, since then, we've been pushing on our
Yeah.
folks in the development community
Yeah.
to help us with what would be some defining characteristics of what a short-term rental property would be. And that's what's in this ordinance. This is draft language. You guys can certainly provide Frank additional direction if there's something else you think should be in it. But it defines two separate types. It defines a vacation villa, which would be the deed-restricted property There's other criteria in here. It talks about a 60-day notice to cure, after which the developer, I believe, would be responsible for an impact fee. Although we all had some reluctance about going back because it's very hard to collect at that stage of the game. But then it also defines a second category of property, which would be a short-term rental. If you look on section 4,
I'm gonna finish it up in a moment.
Thank you,
okay,
'cause I'm
where there's
wrong, I guess.
specific
No,
application, very much like the other piece, and it would qualify for a reduced fee.
Stop for just a moment.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm hearing
I'm
two
still, I'm hearing two
different
different things.
Let me clarify this
things. You just said
real
33 is
quick.
what we talked about last time.
When you're saying
No.
reduced fee,
Yeah.
qualifying under the deed restriction ordinance, that is 2624.
No, 0 fee, right, under deed restriction.
Deed restriction's
Stop.
different.
Let me,
Okay, so this,
right,
forget
stop.
this.
Let me go very slowly to the
Forget
everybody,
this,
okay?
because I keep hearing reduced fee.
All right.
Why did you say zero fee?
All right, you have a vacation
It's
villa,
his,
Yeah.
which is intended to have, for transient use, a month or less, no kids, deed restricted. The deed cannot be modified, the restrictions, without the school board's approval for 30 years, okay? And if it is identified that a kid has moved in there and enrolled in school under the vacation villa, they have 60 days to cure that, meaning the kid's out, or to pay us the impact fee. Okay, the
Who
enforces
enforces?
So this is a
All right.
reduced fee or zero fee?
that is
I really
a
need to
zero
get to that.
fee
Okay.
unless
Cured.
Right, so here's
we
what
find
it
out a
is.
kid moved in, and then they cure it, or they pay the reduced fee for that area.
Now I go back to you. How does this ordinance fit into slide 33?
So next definition is short-term rentals, and short-term rentals need to have their own fee. So what we are showing under Westside would be for any short-term rental. If the county in the future allows them anywhere else, it would still be that rate.
So this is a subset of short-term rentals? This is not all the short-term rentals?
No, let me finish. That's vacation. The second category is what you would know as short-term rental,
Oh, okay.
all right? And if they meet all those requirements,
that.
they automatically are paying the reduced rate for short-term rentals,
Yeah.
all right? Same restriction, can't be removed without
restrict is
the board, et cetera.
It's
If
like
they
short-term
decide not to
rental.
deed restrict.
I've got a
they should.
They
very
still get
simple
the-
question.
Those are the ones that get the
Five
2624,
Yes,
right?
That slide
So they get the 26,
on that
24?
page right there.
These guys get the 26.
If I build a short-term rental in,
This gets zero.
Let's-
what's the name of that place?
Go on.
Stony Brook?
Stony Brook. On this schedule, it's a single-family, short-term rental, I would pay $6,264. If I build a single-family home that I'm going to live in the aisle. thing
Right
in
outside of
Cel-
Stony Brook.
In Celebration,
Full day.
I would pay what?
12,000.
12,811.
Okay.
57.
So, yeah,
A minute ago, they said this is the same schedule we talked about.
no, I know. No, that's what I was trying to clarify as well, so.
Now, this is a start, all right? Got it? Yesterday, had a great meeting with council for the developer. Deborah and I have talked a lot, but there's tweaking that I want to talk about. For example, the entire community is short-term rental, meaning you don't get to pick those two houses.
No.
And we're,
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
so it's just wordsmithing. So anything you think about, like you raised up the homestead, that was not discussed.
Yeah, if that's in there, I can go.
But
Without that in
this,
there, I
this
can't.
is an effort, but I think this only works if we track it annually to start to see, are we actually, is it working?
You,
Just was over there, I didn't hear what you said.
That's fair.
could have some.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you put the homestead exemption there where they can't get homestead, I can get them.
All right, Mr. Wheeler,
I
board,
know that Larry.
can we open up this up for public comments at this time?
I'd like to make one comment to Mr. Walters, who's a good lawyer.
Yeah,
Years ago,
yeah,
he
that's
said,
one.
I had a impact. You said we had the highest impact fee, you wanted the best school system, you got it. Good school system now.
All right, so at this time,
Don't
at this
think it's all on
time,
deaf ears.
we'll open up this workshop for public comments. We did set aside some time. We got about 15 minutes, but we could extend that.
That's what you're
So,
vacation.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, we got the tutorial. Oh, good. We got 45 minutes on this. Very good.
That's the
Is
single
that the
family.
reduce? Yeah, or whatever that.
Did you
rate
want
is.
to?
You have to go over there.
You got it.
Because they want to record it on video.
Kids.
Okay,
Thank you, sir.
can I still sit over there?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you have a microphone and the whole works.
Oh, I supposed to again. I can get there.
There is a chair there still, right?
Is there a chair there, Mr. Walters?
They are.
Oh, good.
There is. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
So just like a normal meeting, state your name and address.
Yeah, I will do that.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Larry Walter. I own Hanson Walter and Associates, and I am the chairman of the Growth Management Task Force here for the Kissimmee Osceola Chamber of Commerce. And this is a subject of which we've been involved with you gentlemen for a number of years. I really do appreciate being invited today to listen. I learned from what I could hear. Unfortunately, I'm getting old, so my hearing's getting bad. I learned a lot from the discussion today, and certainly I appreciate the opportunity of this being brought to growth management, so that growth management is one that talks about details. We asked and try to find out the questions that, and the answers to the questions like you've been asking today. And so we're looking forward to having that casual opportunity to do that, because we understand that we want the best school system in the state. It's for our quality of life, and if we have to pay for it and we get it, then we get something for the dollars that we have. There's a couple of comments that were made today, though, just to start out, that confuses me a little bit. We have two groups of folks that come to our county. One group of folks are the people that want to be residents, and they come and they buy units, and therefore they raise families and they become part of the infrastructure need for students and that sort of thing. Another part of our community is called tourist, and they come to our community and they only want to come here for the fun and frolic and the activities that are here. And we charge residents for those impacts that they create to the infrastructure, and we do not charge, we do charge them sales tax and other things, but we do not charge the tourist for those things. Is that not correct? We don't charge tourists. We have 150,000 tourists a day that come to Osceola County, and they don't pay any kind of impact fee. I wish we could charge them that, but they don't. So our issue really falls in the area of where there's a conflict of those two, okay? And that happens to be in short-term rental. So some of those people that come to this county and stay in a short-term rental, it's an investment, they rent it, they're not impacting the school infrastructure. And some of those folks that want to live in those nice areas, that homes are generally 2 or 3 times more expensive than they are other places, can buy into those areas, and they do become residents, and they do impact our school system. The question is that when you do the population estimates, those are only for residents only. They're not for tourists. So those units that tourists live in are not even part of the calculation for the residential part. That's the confusion. So therefore, if the population estimate is for people that are coming to live here and not just to visit short term, then, and we know how many students that generates, then by reducing the tourist use doesn't increase the population use demand, if that makes sense. So if it's not real clear from the standpoint of that transitional entity that's out there that's called short-term rental, the short-term part of that is the tourists that are coming and using that. We're struggling a little bit to figure that. But they're not putting an impact on anything, just like a restricted subdivision of 55 and over. We've assumed that they don't put a restriction on the school infrastructure. So I guess when you were talking about, well, if we reduce it
out there in the short-term rental area, then everybody else's fees go up. But that's because you're using the units that the tourists are using as part of that calculation. So we really have to get down to how do we differentiate that one little sector that's out there that's causing us all the problem. And I would say it would be to your advantage, this solution. If they're paying tourist tax on their unit, then they're tourist. If they are not, whether they're tourist or not, they're residential. You see, there's got to be a way for them to decide to pay or not pay. So if they're not tourist, they're residential. And if they're not residential, then they're tourist. And the one way that this county has to deal with that is they pay a tourist tax on that. They're required to pay a tourist tax on that, so they're actually breaking the law if they don't pay the tourist tax. So I believe that if you did the calculation by figuring out who's paying tourist tax and who's not, and you subtracted those out that were paying tourist tax and did your calculation, then the reduction in the fee that you have for those would not have an impact on the other mathematical calculation of that fee, if we've got the number right. Of course, these are all estimates, so there's going to be some up and down. The end result is if you're going to add 20,000 students a year, you need to collect enough money to build infrastructure for those 20,000 students a year. I think we all agree with that. We're just trying to figure out how to make sure that the short-term rental folks that are out there, which are doing a very good job of building expensive units with high ad valorem, they're not getting treated the same as the residential side because they're not making an impact. I'm not sure exactly how to do that. We'll ask questions as we go through growth management. We're not trying to take any money from the school system. We want to make sure that you get what you want, but there is something going on out there that's different, and we do think that it's calculable, at least by definition that it could be calculable. And if those are taken out and you calculate your fee, then the fee will be the fee, because you're only going to get the number of students you're going to get. Those tourists are not providing students. We just don't know how many of those are right now. I think that's correct. You said that. Is there not a tourist fee paid for those units that are being used as short-term rentals?
They may be paying it, but they still may be generating kids.
Some are.
Okay, well, how many are the other way? I mean, that if it takes that, it's going to be really hard to do that. So I would say that if they're generating and paying a fee, paying a tourist tax fee, which is a nightly bed tax, which is going to cost them a lot of money if they keep doing that, that they should be tourists. I mean, you're generating, you're getting a tourist tax, the county or whoever's getting that, you're getting your ad valorem on that.
We don't get anything for that.
However, any of the other ones that don't do that don't pay a tourist tax, the ones that are kind of messing with the system and are not paying a tourist tax, unfortunately, they're going to pay their impact fee.
Well, that's why this is designed to try and
That's
get
what
to
we're
that.
trying to address.
Yeah. Question for you there.
Yeah.
So what is our remedy when somebody, because of the way we're doing this, says, you know what, I can pay my tourist tax for a year, $2,000. At the end of the year, I just certify that I'm no longer renting my home and I'm single family. We have no recourse at that point, and they've not paid ad valorem for 10 years or something, which starts to eat into that.
Well, again,
I mean, I can beat this system pretty fast. I can pay resort tax for a month, and then change my mind.
and I do think that there ought to be some mechanism for you to either recover or to average it. You know what?
Well, I think this is the attempt to average.
So what I guess I would say is first start at this, and we'll ask questions about this when it comes to growth management, is that if you have 15,000 units out there and 2,000 of them are paying tourist tax, it's the transformation rate then would only be 2,000 divided by 15,000, which would be a very small number. So they would be paying a pro rata share of the fee, the total fee. That would capture all of that, and you can check that fairly easily every year. So if people want to pay tourist tax instead of paying their impact fee, then that will show up in that number every year that you check to see if the transition rate is moving. Otherwise, what you have to do is what you've been kind of talking about, and it was my understanding last year that you didn't really want to do that because of the complications. But if they want to declare that they're a short-term rental, which is fine, and if they ever transfer, then they have to pay the fee. We had talked about that in the past, which is a very legitimate way of doing that, but unfortunately the school board said they didn't have any way to go after those folks and get that money. We talked about putting liens on the property, and y'all didn't want to be the lien Gestapo or whatever.
I believe the county said they would not.
Yeah, the county agreed. The county said they would not. They would not do that. So you know, I just listened to it for the first time today. I'm trying to make sure that we talk about residents and tourists in different fashions, because that tourist industry out there helps the school from the standpoint, as long as it's not generating students in some of those. It's helping you from an ad valorem standpoint. It's helping in a bunch of ways for the stock. And as long as it's being used for tourists, it really doesn't meet the housing stock requirement that we have coming into this county, because the estimates from the University of Florida don't estimate the number of tourists that are coming. I mean, they do estimate the number of tourists, but not in that particular section. So they are two different animals, and it's only in that short-term rental section that there's a crossover of how they're dealt with. And I'm sure that we can figure out a way to, I think we could, figure out a way to protect the school system, to get its dollars from all of those that are in there using it as residents and are generating students, and then giving a break to the ones that are actually using it as short-term rental and using it for tourists. And once we figure that out, then we need to go figure out how we're going to get the money out of the hotels where the kids are coming out of, because we know that that's going on likewise, and no one wants that to happen. No one wants the hotels to be used as residents, but unfortunately, the circumstances within our county right now, because of the homeless situation and some other things, are creating that avenue of a problem for the school system likewise. But I would think that with, like Brock, his folks do a lot of units out there. Brock, what is the percentage in your project that you generally would predict to be a short-term rental in that project?
About half and half.
About half and half in a new project.
Brock and his people have been working closely.
Yeah, no, I know they have. They've always been cooperative, and that's the reason I picked on him. That's the reason I picked on him, because I knew that he could answer those questions. So in a brand new one like that, even half of them are there. So the generation rate over the whole district, probably the transition rate is probably, I'm just going to guess, it's 80% or something. So we're only talking about that if you could actually calculate that number, you're only talking about a transition rate or a reduction in that transition rate of whatever that is. Now, maybe the way that you've got it out is better. We'll find that out when we go to growth management. If the people we represent, which is the business owners and developers, say this is the best way to do this, then growth management's going to support that. We're going to ask questions to make sure of how it works out, but we're going to ride with our business owners and how they deal with it, because we're finally getting to deal with the difference between tourists and residents, and that's really all we've been wanting to deal with for the last 4 or 5 years. So I'll try to answer any questions. I understand there's a schedule to bring it to growth management. I haven't personally, no one's contacted me to set up the dates or anything like that, so I wish they would contact. I did talk to Sarah here to try to get those dates on our schedule so that we can make sure that that occurs and does that in a fashion that's acceptable to this board. And we do appreciate the opportunity to be able to to look at this and come back and make some recommendations. And thank you very much for letting us be involved in this process.
Thank you, Larry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on his comment, you should know that yesterday I was contacted via an email from the home builder, the Greater Orlando Builders Association, saying that they were going to have their consultant do an analysis, and I conferred with Dr. Pace and wrote back and said, approximately how long do you need in an effort to us trying to coordinate, et cetera. They said ideally 2 months. Dr. Pace and I spoke this morning. That would, Dr. Pace, am I correct? That would move our schedule from November to December, where we would wrap up our end in December rather than November, and then move it to the county in January, if you all decided to accommodate that request.
When did our RFP go out for this? For the
July?
service?
June?
So, and that was public knowledge, that wasn't done by vacuum. I mean, so for 5-6 months, it's been out there, now they're offering to do a study? Where they been?
If you look on slide 37, and we've got it on the board, this was what we had proposed as our revised schedule since the last meeting. So the really question is for the board. November the 7th was going to be our next scheduled school board workshop. We were going to try to get this to Growth Management Task Force, have a couple of discussions with them in between. That gives that's 4 weeks from today. If instead you wanted to allow GOBA to do their study and provide information and wanted to give them 8 weeks, that brings you to December the 12th from today, so we could make that instead of actually, you could do the workshop ahead of time and then vote, or workshop and then come back and vote in January. That's really up to you.
We're not under a time deadline.
We're not under a deadline, although I wouldn't mind letting them work concurrently and looking at and
Yeah,
still
but
maintaining.
it's the new time, the new.
I don't know, I
schedule.
understand.
Is it okay? You got it right?
This timeline here,
No, the one.
you're
that's proposed.
you're talking about adding another 8
Yes.
weeks to this timeline.
Correct.
What I'm saying is that if you wanted to shift it out, you could move from, instead of having a workshop on November the 7th, we would have the workshop on December the 12th, that's 8 weeks from today.
1 month out.
And then you could vote, we would bring a recommendation to you in January. That's up to the board.
May also want to talk about the growth management task force meeting, because when I was speaking to Mr. Welcher before this meeting, he indicated that there may need a few extra weeks.
Well, it depends on our schedule and yours. Usually, it takes us about 2 to 3 weeks to really go through this. We meet about 3 to 4 hours a week, and that's only 8 to 12 hours, getting information back and digesting that to make some recommendations to Dr. Pace here and maybe to the board. We might need a little more time.
Why don't we just stay with the schedule as is, but if you could contact the superintendent, and you can always just see just check with me or whoever is the next person that you check with about changing that. But we don't know enough as to whether we really need to go ahead and extend this another 8 weeks. That's what I'm
Well, I don't know that.
That's what I'm hearing.
I'm not
hearing.
asking for 8
Okay.
weeks.
That's what I'm
They
hearing.
got 2
So-
meetings with us. I was maybe
Yeah.
asking,
This
it might
is-
take one more and then,
Right. This is
3
the open.
meetings with Growth Management?
8 weeks.
well, we've only meet
That's
for
what I said.
3 to
Chairman,
6
this is-
hours at a time.
We're
so-
not, we're,
This is
let me-
public comments. I need to continue with public comments. Briefly?
we're not moving it back 8 weeks.
Okay.
We're moving it back 4 weeks if you agree to work to let me tell the developer, the Orlando business thing, you can have 8 weeks, here is the schedule.
They've already got 4 weeks to November 7th.
All right.
He's adding 4 more.
But that seems reasonable.
So then
So-
what I would recommend is that we cancel the board workshop on the 7th.
Okay.
Okay?
That'll allow us a little bit more flexibility to make sure we're with the growth management task force, but I'll plan to, maybe, we have a facilities workshop already on the 12th. Maybe we'll try to start that earlier, instead of 4 o'clock, say 2 o'clock. Is that okay?
So the 7th workshop is now the 12th at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
And I'll have Tanya send you all that
Thank
information.
you. All right.
So that's November 12th?
December 12th.
December 12th. All right.
We're not meeting on my birthday. To talk about impact fees.
The buildings guy is here, Rachel.
But we will
I
add a
know, I
workshop
got
on the
it.
12th.
Can we limit him to 30 seconds?
He's been patient.
That's gonna be tough.
He's been patient. He gets us much minute to 2:30. At
They'll get
2:30.
3 minutes, but
I
he's
do have to
at 5 and a
adjourn
half.
I'm so sorry.
We have to
Take the
adjourn.
last 30.
December 12th, 2 o'clock?
Well, we don't have to adjourn it, but I have to step out at 2:30 if you guys will
I can leave
continue
at
your
2:30
vote.
also.
So please state your name and address and give us your comments.
My name is Hector Lissa Swain. I live at 4040 Asheville Lane, St. Cloud. And some of you may have noticed I've been rocking back and forth over there because I've been wanting to get up here. And I would like to spend the next 2 or 3 hours sharing some of the things that I've actually been working on for the last 2 years. This is definitely not a new issue. We all know that. This is something that we've been working with for quite a while. And there was a lot of questions being asked. And unfortunately, you can't run up and answer the question or at least add to the question as they were going on. I actually represent a company that Frank kind of referred to, a new direction. And this is what we've been doing. Some are very familiar with our product. We are a vacation rental resort. And when I say resort, I don't mean that we collect tourist development tax. We do that. Each one of our business owners or property owners actually have a business license. They do pay tourist development tax, but we go a little beyond that. We have a front desk, 24/7 concierge service. We have transportation. We have a restaurant on site. So we're not what you would consider a typical subdivision that has a management company or multiple management companies. We have one management company, and that's basically where we make a lot of our money. A lot of our money is made being the management organization that takes care of all the accounting for all of our owners. And just a little background on our owners, 100% of them are Brazilian. Every single unit is owned by a Brazilian investment. This is just a way of them kind of moving their money out of one place, putting it in a place that has a good return, capitalizing on our tourism industry, which is continually growing 5 to 7% year over year. This is the place to come, and people are looking where one-time motels and hotels were your traditional accommodation. Now they like that sense of home when you come into a vacation home or a townhome where they can bring their family in and enjoy 6 to 10 days. And that's something that that's 100% of our business. I know someone mentioned that sometimes they make a decision or a developer makes a decision at the time of permitting. We actually spent millions of dollars in marketing and research before we even did this. And this is something that we already have our planned developments all the way, we have actually 4 of them out there on West 192. And we already, I think Mr. Wheeler brought up the fact about deed restrictions and how come they haven't done it. Well, actually we did. We did that to ourselves long before that, but it had nothing to do with the school impact fee. It had everything to do with the business model. In case you're wondering, a lot of these people that are investing in our properties and any of these vacation rentals out in the corridor, it is a form of investment. And what they're doing, what they want, our investors don't want to have their guests staying next to somebody playing basketball at 11:30 in the morning or at night. They don't want to have to deal with a school bus. They don't want to have to deal with all the things that a regular residential community deals with. So again, there is a new direction taking place out there in the corridor, and I think Brock has seen it. There's a few other organizations out there that are starting to see a transition in that vacation rental market. And you're absolutely, I think someone mentioned earlier, what's there to guarantee that this won't turn into a community at some point where they will start selling these homes? We have it so that you can't just put your house up on the market and have a Century 21 dealership sign or a rental sign or for sale sign in front of your property. We have to sell it ourselves, plus we have to sell it to somebody with the understanding that there's a purchase agreement that includes everything that's in there. The resort that's currently up and running right now, there's actually a restriction in there that says you can't even enroll your kids, and it calls it out in the Osceola County school system, because there's penalties for that. And that's one of the things that's part of our program already. So deed restrictions, we already do that to ourselves. And one of the things, again, we talked about, I think we looked at the ordinance. We as a developer do not want to handcuff the school district, but we also at some point had to be, I think we mentioned uses. For a couple of years, we've gone to the county says go to the school board says the county has to address the use. We're kind of caught in a limbo here, but in the meantime, we are paying towards development tax, ad valorem tax, school impact fees. There's a lot of things, and all we're trying to do is just try to again, we want to help everybody through the situation, but we also want to understand there's an industry out there that, because of the industry itself, we as Osceola County tax residents enjoy lower taxes because of that. So we want to make sure that we keep that in mind when we're moving forward and come up with a decision. Again, we don't want to handcuff you guys. We don't want to make it more difficult, but we are paying a little bit of everything, and we're like probably the only industry that does that. So, thank you. If you have any questions, I kept it under an hour.
Remember when you were in a meeting with me and
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
remember when we were in a meeting with your owner and your owner said he's willing to pay half the impact fee?
Yeah, no, we're not. Yeah.
Do you remember that meeting?
That
Your owner said that?
That would have been a long time ago, but right now, after the exercise.
Do you remember that meeting though?
No, I don't remember that.
Okay.
But are there any questions?
Yeah, well, relative to the deed restrictions you've got, keep in mind that when Celebration first started out, while the deed restrictions weren't the same as yours, there were some very specific deed restrictions written by a Disney real estate attorney who moved in there with his family, and they wanted to move out, and he left Disney and sued them and got the deed restrictions changed. So I'm not suggesting that you fit that model, but that happened in Celebration in 1996-97.
Are there any other questions?
I think one thing, I think Clarence mentioned earlier, there's really nothing, and you're absolutely right, Clarence, when you talk about, there's nothing stopping a developer from going and collecting 1 month of tourism taxes and saying, look, I'm going to put these deed restrictions. There's got to be something in place to kind of protect that. But I think to go to that, and I know to go to that extreme.
I was making an extreme
No, absolutely, and I agree with that.
Hector, would your group support having a restriction in there that says you can never file for homestead exemption?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you've met the owner. This is a lifetime investment for these people. They're not, this is the only thing they want to do is, it's a hotel.
So they would support that they can never apply for homestead, none of the owners can ever do it?
That's something I'd have to get that from them. But at the end of the day, you've met them and you know that is a hotel.
All right, thank you very much. I want to give other people an opportunity. I think Brock's up next. Yes.
Brock, do you have anything to do with short-term rentals while you're here?
Thank you for being patient, and we will try to get you in as well.
We will.
Even if Brock Nicholas, 7250 Fordham Drive in Orlando. First, just disclosure, we're a big residential builder here, actually the largest in Central Florida. We build and sell more homes than any other company here. And I do just about as many primary homes as I do short-term rentals. So in terms of my economic interest in this discussion, I'm on both sides of it. I want to tell you just interesting facts. We've been working for several months with the school district, and I was asked to respectfully stand down and not move forward with our own individual analysis and data and to see how this played out, and we've done that. But I think it's important for you to just understand the financial impact of building these homes and the real student generates. Over the last couple of years, we've built 924 short-term rental homes in the communities that were listed here. It's in the data set. So in that data set, we're about 20% of the entire market, which is not an insignificant number. Our student generation is 16 kids out of those 924 closed homes. These sections of short-term rental communities, they are, by the way, not deed restricted. They are physically separated from the primary parts of the community. So if we have a big community, you think of the geometry, we cut it in half by a major roadway, sometimes public. We gate both sides. On the resort side, we have major amenities. In one case, we have $30 million of amenities in the ground, all for the benefit of overnight and weekly use. And so, but I want to be honest with you, our documents do not say that you cannot live in the residence permanently. In fact, it says that you may rent it on a short-term basis, and if you do, then you're subject to all the applicable laws and regulations and taxes and fees of such people. So I don't have anything physically right now that's telling the people there that they're breaking the law if they move in with a child, and yet on almost 1,000 homes built, we have 16 kids. So we've spent, our company has spent on average over $500,000 per student. And so when I look at your calculation up here at 30, I'm thinking, I laughed, I chuckled to myself, because our impact in these communities is $500,000 a kid. That's our capital contribution to this school district. So I think that we do deserve a vote to have this discussion, to give you answers. We remain open and available to do that. But I think in terms of the dual rational nexus that you have to sort of satisfy, while our homes can generate a student, because we don't prohibit that they cannot, the amount of students being generated per home, the other side of the dual, I think this particular case, our homes, our industry, my communities are being unfairly taxed by the full school impact fee. And if that means the other side has to move by some measure because you figure out how to track both and have two sides of it, then so be it. And respectfully, my counterpart here, who I respect tremendously, he's only in one side of the business, and so his economic interest is aligned with making something happen on short-term rentals. I'm on both sides. I have to underwrite the deals for both fees.
Brock, going this direction as we work through it resolves the issue, am I correct?
Yeah, I think it's impractical to assume that you can put somebody on notice, give them a 60-day notice and cure, and then go through some process to do it. You're not doing that right now with hotels or non-residential uses. There are abuses happening. As I just told you, we don't design or restrict, but I've got 16 kids. The reality is, and to Jay's point, which I think is a very interesting nuance, is what about homestead? I don't know the legality of limiting people to not filing for homestead, but that's an interesting twist to the whole discussion, which I think I would be open to.
There's a lot of people living in, if you even look at this, there's only 2 of these lines that have homestead exemption. Multifamily pays impact fees, never has homestead.
Right.
So even it can be a full-time residence owned by me, rented to Deborah.
Yes.
Never be homesteaded.
That's correct.
But not necessarily paying tourist tax.
But again, I don't know the legality, or as you said, somebody challenged the deed restriction and won. I don't know if you wrote that deed restriction, could it be challenged? I don't know. I
Somebody
don't know.
wants an exemption, and this is different. That wasn't a
Sure.
That was different. That was relative to the terms they could sell the unit and the revenue that had to go back to the developer.
I don't know. Again, I have not explored that legal issue, which I will. Here's what I do know. If there is a process, right, in fact, in November of 1992, when the first ever impact fee was established by this district, there was a provision in the code that allowed somebody to submit an alternative study at the time of permit and receive consideration for that. And that administrative process still exists in this district to some extent. It goes through the superintendent first, and then to the board. And then if somebody exhausted the administrative options, that there are litigation procedures that could be undertaken. I'm saying, addressing this like you are, I think is relieving a lot of future potential for that process to gum up the administrative staff and this board when you should be just taking care of kids and building a good district. And that could get very time consuming and expensive to go through. But that's where I think the district's headed if you don't figure out how to bifurcate the use. And we are willing to work with you in any way possible. We'll share data, come to meetings, we'll participate in any way we can add value.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the board?
So you'll support no homestead?
I would say the no homestead thing, if I could have my counsel verify that I as a real estate seller, and I could disclose that properly, and that wasn't providing any new liability for me as the seller, I would absolutely support that.
But Jay, what about all the homes that don't have homestead?
Well, we're talking about these right here. We're not talking about those. We're talking about.
No, I am talking about.
No, we're talking about vacation resort rentals.
I'm saying they can generate, his whole neighborhood could I'm not going, I'm just using this example. His whole neighborhood could have children in it and not one home have a homestead exemption.
Because they're rentals.
Right.
No, I understand that.
Because they're.
But in the event that somebody actually buys one and decides to live in it for, and say, this is my permanent home, then technically.
You realize there's only 2 lines on this that have homestead exemption.
But you also understand that if you register to vote and you consider that your primary residence, you can go apply for homestead.
If you own it.
If you own it.
If you own it, right.
Not if you rent it.
There's nothing precluding someone from selling it to someone who might do that.
That's an interesting point.
You're both correct, by the way. You're just saying this isn't the only answer. He's saying this is one additional piece to add to it, that's all.
Really, it comes down to, can we
Oh, I thought he was saying that's it.
count the short-term and vacation rentals? I mean,
Are we okay with?
Well, one more thing. The county, they review plats, they review the recorded declaration, they saw our design, they saw the fact that we allowed the use of short-term rentals. I mean, there's ways, I think, that they're already going through a process, whether or not it's being properly documented and categorized, different issue, but they are reviewing.
yeah. No, I think we're counting good at the county now. Where we're not counting is on the data that will give us a number, and that's where the issue is.
Mr. Thacker, you had.
Brock, slide 33 that was up there for a long time that had the units, it's the west side,
There.
that one. What does this, give me your opinion on this. So in other words, you build one in your short-term place, it's gonna be 60, that's too far from me, it's $6,200. As opposed to 10 or 11, whatever you're paying now. So instead of paying $500,000 for 16 students, you'd pay $250,000.
Right, so you can appreciate my issue, which is I still don't think that's fair for
Okay, that's
what I'm seeing for data. However, there's a intention here to understand it and to keep looking at it, which I think is what the industry is looking for. Hey, you have the same issue as everybody else. Greater Orlando, 2.5-ish million people living here, 70 million people a year coming into town, washing in and out, making waves. I think you have the same 25 times, 30 times problem as it relates to the impact on permanent resident and utility and facilities.
Would this program, whatever you want to call it, this option,
Yes, sir. Thank you, Larry.
be in the right direction for you? I mean, clearly it's in the right direction.
If you did this as a first step, I think that the industry would quiet down long enough to have you collect some
To do the
data.
second
I
step?
still don't think if you did this for short-term rental and you required some really interesting and prohibited detailed disclosure that would have to go to every buyer.
I think if you do this, they're on to do whatever they want.
Right, exactly. So I think we
You
come up
paid
with
your
some
impact fee for
ordinance,
your-
you pass along some recognition that the gen rate is less, and you feel good that it can be tracked and monitored. It's a good start.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. All right. We have the next gentleman, please. Just state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Lee Steinhauer, 1231 Wade Circle, Celebration, Florida. I'm with the Greater Orlando Builders Association. I was going to jump into the conversation, but I know Hector was chomping at the bit. So, but we appreciate the time to do an alternative study. Part of the reason we want to do it is to address the short-term rentals, to see if we can figure out a way to separate them out. Because I think once you identify them as a separate product, and this is echoing a lot of what Brock said, once you identify them as a separate product and have a student generation rate attached to them, then you run into an issue that if on the say just the west side, right, is only going to be benefiting from the lower impact fee rate. If a short-term rental that's not in the west side, the developer says, well, wait a minute, you've identified a generation rate for this product, this new product, you're going to run into potential legal challenges down the road.
Currently, the county only allows them in the west side.
It only allows in the west side.
But going forward, once you identify the product and you attach a generation rate to it, then you're going to run into potential issues down the road. We, as an industry, I think just want to have the ability to pay whatever the fair rate is for that product, and it's something that we're having our consultant take a look at. We're going to see if we can come up with a way that would be acceptable to everyone to identify that product and then come up with a generation rate, and certainly deed restrictions are something we're looking at as well. So I just wanted to let you all know that we want to be a resource in this process and be involved going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
No, I just want to go on the record to say, for me, I want to see short-term rental as a category. I want to see it as a 6th category here. I'll say that. But at the same time, that means all the rest of them have to go up. They cannot qualify as a single, because right now we're calling them a single family or a townhouse or whatever they're building. We cannot create, and we've said this already, a separate number that then doesn't identify what we're losing in the rest of the numbers somewhere else. And so I want to make sure, you guys don't have to keep telling me this, I'm on board. But I've got at least one company, and I don't mind finding another one, that tells me we can't count them. So the issue here is not whether you bring me a number telling me generation rates. I get it. I think we all get it. You don't have to waste time doing that. What you need to find out is how to, the methodology, legal methodology for us to come up with a generation rate, which is .000 whatever it is, and let us use that for this data. But until you do that, you're spinning your wheels doing anything else. You've got to come up with a way they can count it and put it into these.
That's what I'm saying. That's part of the process.
That's what you're
exactly
doing.
what we're trying to do.
Low generation.
Well, I'm not arguing about what the generation rate is.
But a way to capture it, yeah.
It's got to be captured.
4,300 students.
Hold up and-
No, because I
Yeah.
understand going forward, you're going to use this methodology rather than just a snapshot of a generation.
If you guys can come up with that, I think.
2017.
The homestead exemption for the short-term vacation?
No, it's I think Brock, it's an interesting proposition. It's something that I'm just not comfortable going on record and saying yes yet, but it's something I'm going to look at. It's a maybe. I appreciate. No, I think it's a good point, but it's something we're going to look at.
Very good.
No, I want.
Thank you, sir. It looks like,
I'm even going to say it anyway, that it's not on the agenda.
I don't think I see anyone else. We only have a few minutes in any case. Oh, yes, of course.
So I understand Hector, they're more like overseas and Westside. So Brock is the management company, what's the life expectancy?
So, again, back to full disclosure, we do not restrict the type of management. We allow it to be open. So we have more than 30 management companies, including self-managed, VRBO and HomeAway. Some folks choose to self-manage. All the restrictions in the community still apply. And that's an economic choice. As the seller of the real estate, we just didn't feel like it was right to pin them down on a single form of management. It created a new liability for us. But some companies exist on the management revenue, so it's a different model.
I just clarify next steps.
No, I'm never going to build one of these communities on its own. I'm always going to have a complementing non-short-term rental phase. So when somebody walks in with children or wanting to have a golf membership or something permanent, we send them to the other model center. We have a place for them, so we don't anticipate the change. And many foreign investors in our deals too. Many foreign investors.
I just want to add something to that comment.
Please, Mr. Thacker.
And I get that some of these things will convert at some point, but I also get, and it was back to the point I was trying to make to Jay, the reason that I sell my home and don't pay an impact fee is because I've been paying ad valorem for years. If one of these things is worth $600,000, is paid ad valorem for 10 years, never generated a student, I'm willing to say we're even. Bring in a student at some point. I don't know if it's 10 years or 20 years. But 10 years probably, I don't know what the school impact fee on $600,000 or the annual taxes are probably $4,000 or $5,000 a year.
Under this.
So we've got it for 10 years, it's $50,000.
Well, 10 years could be worth $800,000 if they don't homestead, and we're getting the taxes on that.
Clarence, under this,
School
you're looking at.
Wouldn't?
School ad valorem would.
Would not be?
No,
Before.
Not 4 or 5,000.
A year, but Tim, under
I
this.
figured $800,000.
2,800, 3,200, something like that.
Okay, so it's $32,000. I'm still okay.
And under the proposed ordinance, you'd be getting it for 30 years at a minimum. So
Whatever the number, I don't care. My point is, at some point, they paid their way. So,
Mr. Weisser?
Yeah, my question's for you, Mr. Thacker. I was going down the road of everything we discussed. I'm not saying I'm committing to it with the addition of this. What I heard from you last was this type of fee structure without this type of language, and I just want to make sure that I heard that correctly.
I think are you asking kind of slide 33?
Yes, sir.
If they do slide 33, for example, and they paid $6,000 for 10 homes in their short-term rental subdivision, however many, or 100 or whatever it is, as far as I'm concerned, we know at some point it's going to convert. We know what has converted is at 50%, which is kind of what that number roughly is.
Yep.
And it gets back to the same thing. If it converts over 10 or 20 years and they've been paying that ad valorem without student generation for the first 10 or so, I'm okay with that.
Here's part of my question is.
You see what I mean?
No, I do. I do. But to be honest with you, when you said that, it caught me a little bit by surprise because I thought we were all going down the road of looking at the modified fee potentially and incorporating
And
some
both.
of the proposed language. And when you said that.
I have a problem with things that we have to monitor in 20 years and who's going to really do it.
So the key then becomes, and I think it's unfortunate at this point because I understand time constraint, is direction for the superintendent, because the direction that the superintendent's been working on is the expanded study, working with council on language, and now I think we're in a position where we're not certain, do we continue to explore the language piece? Is that the will of the majority of the board? Is that just your opinion,
That was just
or
my
my
opinion.
opinion? No, I know. There's no criticism in this.
Yeah.
It's really just, I think as we sit at this moment, we leave our council and our superintendent with a void of clear direction.
Because really, slide 34 goes back to at least the second option, which says a separate fee for short-term rental properties with the clear trackable definition. And that's what at least, I think, section 4 of the ordinance was trying to get to.
I almost look at that slide as you could get rid of that west side column and put it underneath mobile home, short-term rentals. And it would be, I mean, I know there's different types of short-term rentals.
But how do we define a short-term rental?
Well, that's, Ricky said it 20 times, can we count them?
Yeah, we can't count them. I mean,
But that's
But
what
that's
this
what that
language
does.
is supposed
Yep.
to try to do.
So
It doesn't have to be this language, but we gotta have some language.
My comment at this point is, I'm not willing to say that I don't want this language or
If
some
that language is to
variation of it.
identify them, I haven't read the whole thing.
Right.
If that's what it's for, I'm all for that. It's getting into this, we're gonna put a lien on your home if.
No.
And I haven't read, that's what I thought that
Yeah,
was.
Clarence, that puts all the burden, first of all, there's limited tracking on our part. If someone's identified, it puts the burden on the property owner and association to deal with it, not us.
Okay. I mean, I don't have,
Yeah, and I'll state my this way. You know, Mr. Wheeler's comment about the non-homestead, I think, is an additional layer to the conversation. It doesn't solve the problem, but it's one more piece of this. It says, okay, how do we begin to build our system and process to where we ensure that we're sending out the message about what the intent is behind the fiscal decision that we're making with these various categories and columns. This is not going to solve yesterday's problem or even today's problem, but it's setting the groundwork for how do we deal with the future and how do we lay out the work so that there is a clearer understanding down the road for us to identify clearly who is and who isn't and who does and who doesn't qualify.
if that's an identifier document, I'm all for it.
Okay.
I didn't, if that's what that is, I hadn't read.
Well, and that's the way I perceive the document.
Okay, if that's what the purpose of that is,
Yep.
if it was to put on 47 parameters on the county's gonna put a lien and this, that, I'm not for that. But if that's to identify what makes them, I hate the deed restriction thing, because I think then we're totally out for 20 years, because it's gonna take that long for the formula to catch up.
yeah. Dr. Pace?
I just needed some direction and some clarity, and I understand that we don't have it from all 5 of you
Yeah.
yet.
No.
But
I mean, you
think-
got it from 3, and I'm for this document. I'm for doing it that way.
Yes.
I will say I do not like. I don't like this necessarily, but I think it's the right direction to head
I
down.
would agree.
And I want to follow up because Ricky's 100% correct. And Clarence, you said this at a previous meeting. The students are coming.
Right.
The reduction is there. We're not recapturing it somewhere. There's a major, significant hit with still a high number of new students coming into this district. And this, to me, still does not capture that reality, even though I know I'm not going to like that reality. We talked about that, right? So you're right. I mean, you know, we reduce here, something has to give over here because all
But
these.
this gives.
But this does that a little bit.
This does take it back up.
What the problem was, if
It
you
took that
just go
12.8 from 11
to
something.
the
I know, but
$2,800.
Does that capture the whole? That's my point.
I was assuming it did.
It does, because you have a lot more units rest of the county, so they don't have to go up as much as 50% to make up for that smaller sets of
Okay,
units.
so I'll look at that first.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that it would capture all of it.
Yeah, that's the only way we are able to balance.
Sure, I'll look
Not
at it.
through the inventory.
Does
Where we
anybody-
just lose is if we just go to.
Correct.
A low short-term
Yeah.
rental on
No,
slide
we can't-
31.
We can't afford to do
We
that.
can't afford
in my
it.
opinion.
And that's where we're saying we don't have a reliable, reasonable sample size to make that work.
The worst thing about this
So
is
31 does not represent
it's
33
not a
does.
perfect solution.
Correct.
No, this is not perfect, and, but you know what, I think it's a.
Unless we have a little tab to go over sections, say
And
that's
I
it.
just wanted to comment real quick before we close this up, that also that impact fee affects the value of your home when you sell it. Because all these other homes now have a $12,800 fee on them, so when you resell that home to somebody's buying it, they're actually kind of paying.
They are paid. It's reflected in the value.
It's reflected in the value of the home, so,
Well, let this not be lost, by the way. That is a huge fee
yes.
to
Yes.
develop a residential
Correct.
unit, and that is going to have an impact in some way at some point on
Absolutely.
development in our community. We've had this conversation. I said it a few years ago. We said it in workshops. As much as we're trying to work through and find what's the right thing to do, let it not be lost on us. You put a $13,000 development fee on real estate. What's actually happened is compression on land values in Osceola County and the inability for people to qualify to purchase the homes we want them to purchase here in our community. That is a simple fact.
Well, that
I live
depends
this
on who
every
you
day.
want to qualify to purchase a home in your community. And who we can have in our community, how many roads we have, how many schools we have. So, there's a lot of questions in that. Anybody, Frank?
No, we've got
Thank
this
you.
right
Good
there.
morning.
Mr. Thacker?
You good?
Call if
Dr.
you have any
Pace?
thoughts.
Everybody's good? Tanya? Adjourned.
Thank you all.
See y'all in a couple hours.
And we meet
I'll
tomorrow,
talk about
too.
the same thing there, too.
Lunch.
Is it,